All right, buddies. It's that time again. Time to make some art. We are back in my cardboard box studio. You guys have already tackled most of the facial features. And we're going to end things here with the ear. Now, I also think at some point I do want to show you how to draw hair, because that's pretty important too. But after that, you're going to be able to put together a pretty good portrait. Now, I haven't decided if we're actually going to do portraits. Really, the best way to do that is if you have, good paper and, good size to work with. But we'll figure it out as we go. For today's drawing, we're going to start out kind of how we started out with the other ones. And I'm going to try to make this a little quicker than the other videos, but we'll see what happens. I tend to talk. When we did the other drawings, we started with 3 lines for everything. So with the eye, it was the top, the bottom, and then it was that kind of top eyelid fold, right? Those are the 3 lines we started with for that. For the mouth, it was that middle line, the top line, and the bottom line. For the nose, it was really just this area, but still 3 lines. Okay, so for the ear, we're going to start the same way. Now, there is a reason that we wait on the ear to show you guys. I think this is by far the most challenging part of the face to draw. But given how good you guys have done on some of the other stuff, who knows, man? You guys might nail it. I'm trying to break this down into as simple a parts as I can. I would say it's most similar to the nose, where most of this is going to be shading, but there's definitely more lines that we can draw and set ourselves up for success than with the nose, which really you couldn't do those long vertical lines because they're not there. It's all shading. So the first thing I want us to consider is that the ear, it's probably not going to be just like totally straight up and down. It sits on the head at a little bit of a tilt. Okay, so if the eyes and nose are over here, we're doing a side profile. If the eye and nose is over here, the ear is going to be further into the side of the head, and it's going to be tilted a little bit. Okay, so that's the first thing to think about. When you take your photo, make sure, or if you're using a photo from online, that's okay too. But if you do take your own, make sure, number one, it's lit really well. You want to get some really nice shadows on there. And number two, you really want to make sure that it has a bit of a tilt to it. Okay, so try to take that photo, if you do take one, nice and horizontal so you get that realistic tilt to it. Okay, so we're going to start out with the outer part of the ear. Okay, basically like the silhouette of the outside of the ear. That's how we're going to start our 3 lines. That's our first one. So I'm going to recommend you guys just, there's a couple ways to go about this. Some people like to block in the major shapes. I'm going to recommend you just draw what you see as well as you can. You guys have had enough practice that this should go pretty well. And you definitely want to make sure it's just as important as, the specific shape of your eye. You want to make sure that you are drawing all these curves exactly how you see them. Don't generalize them at all. Okay? And sort of start with a shape that looks somewhat like that. Okay. My camera may zoom in and out of focus, but I'll always double check it to make sure it's nice and clear for you guys what's happening there. Okay, so that's our first step. The second one is, it's a line that's right below this. Okay, now this is called the helix. That top part of the ear, or really the outside part, that furthest out kind of flap and fold, that's the helix. And we're going to draw the bottom of that. Okay, so the important part for this is to make sure that we stay the correct distance. Just like for the top eyelid line, that third line that people tend to forget, it's really important that you get that right and you try to get the shape of that and all the movements, and the distance is really important. How far you put that. I think I'm just going to stop that there. Okay. Now, hopefully you can see these things on your own ear. This outer shape should be very obvious. This inner one, this is called the leg of the helix right here, this part of the ear. This inner one, at the bottom, you'll see I kind of just faded away. That's because on the image I'm looking at, it really just kind of like fades away. So now that line kind of stops being sharp. The shadow just kind of blends out onto the rest of the ear and onto the earlobe here at the bottom. So that's the second step of that. The third one, and once we put this in, it's going to kind of look like an ear. The third one is going to give us the area where the ear hole is, the tragus, and that's where I'm actually going to start you here. The tragus is that kind of funky shaped piece right here. Now this is different on everyone, how this looks right here. On this one, looking at how far I am from this line, it kind of goes it really comes back in and down. Definitely give yourself enough room here for that earlobe to exist. And then it comes up and over, and this is where it's going to kind of start to look like an ear, is where this curves back around and into that line that makes up our second line, that leg of the helix there. Okay, see, that really kind of looks sort of like an ear. It's, you know, rough with the parts, and they're sort of looking about how big they should be. But really, what's important to this actually looking like a realistic version of the ear, a realistic drawing, is all the shading. Okay, so that's most of like the line work that we're going to do. The rest of this is going to be shading. Now, I'm going to ask you to start by shading the darkest parts that you see. Okay, now for most of you, that's going to be this area here, and this area here. These folds, they kind of come out towards us, and so there's really a lot of light that is not hitting this. It's sort of an absence of light, and it's going to be different amounts for every person. Depending on how your ear was lit when you took that photo, or with the source image that you're going from, you might get some shadow in this area, and you're definitely going to get some, I would think, in this area here, because this line that kind of disappears, that's a really kind of intense area of tension where that fold, this kind of folds in, and then it kind of comes out onto the bottom part of that helix. Okay, so my best advice for you is to go ahead and block out the shape of your darkest areas. Mine sort of looks like this, and then there's one more here. I'd say about three parts on this that are really a little darker than the rest of it. These are the darkest, most intense areas. Now, there might be one of those three, and I'll point them out. 1, 2, 3. There might be one of those that's darker than the others. And if that's the case, still block all of them out, and then start with that darkest one. This one, we're going to start pretty dark here. Now, some people like to use, when they're, and you may not have this at home, but they like to use something called a blending stomp. Now, you've probably heard me say over and over, Don't, finger blend. Don't smudge with your fingers. Just try to make it happen with the tip of your pencil. And that's what I still recommend. But if you do have something called a blending stomp at home, that can give you some of the values we're going to do next. It can give you some really, really smooth, really accurate things. If you don't have one, don't worry about it. It's really good for me to be able to grade you guys on what you're capable of doing with the pencil anyway. And as I notice differences on this, I'm just going to try to make those changes to those shapes. Okay, it's really super dark in here. I'm going to go really dark. Then it kind of fades out, but it's still pretty dark. So all those areas that you block out for your darkest areas, make sure that whatever space you blocked out, it's all pretty dark. I mean, there'll be some variations, but hold yourself to that that value structure and that set of values that you've already determined. Those are your darkest areas. So even where it kind of lightens a bit here, that's still pretty dark. That's like a sort of medium dark value for that. And the last one, this kind of creates, once again, it starts really dark and then it kind of creates another smaller shape in here. It's a little darker than the rest of it. And then on mine it gets darker at the base of that helix where there's not a lot of light getting in there. Okay, that looks pretty good. The next part of this, I want you to look for any, you know what, actually before I do that, I want to remind you guys, during these videos, at any point where you see that there's a step, I know with the other videos I stopped you and I said, okay, go ahead and draw this. But you have the ability to stop this video wherever you want. So once you see that there's a lot of information that you've been given and you want to stop it and go ahead and do that step, I would go ahead and take advantage of that ability for you to do that. I would say if you want to break it into a series of steps, the first one, go ahead and draw those 3 lines, okay? And then go back to the video, do this part, okay? And then you're going to kind of just finish this off. The last step is really just to add like the midtones and the light tones. Now I'm still going to start with the darkest of my midtones. And we talked about this part just briefly. This gets a fair amount of value and it fades up, and it goes really quite a bit of the ear, so it's hitting a lot of different parts, and because of that it's getting a lot of different variation in value. And it's going to be really important down here how this ends. I notice it's kind of darker in here, and then it kind of fades up a little bit. There's all these weird, subtle things that happen. And I can't make a step out of all of this. I can try to break it down into smaller, easier to understand stuff for some of it, but the ears are just so different on people. Some people have a connected lobe. Some people have what they call a free lobe. Some people, their ears you can actually see right into the ear canal, and others, you know, you really can't. A couple really important things to think about here. This area and this area, okay? You see how they kind of, at least on the ear I'm drawing, how they kind of like, they get small and they come down to a point almost. It's really important that we figure out what edge is sharp like this and what edges are kind of like soft, and help things to kind of blend together and show that those parts of the ear are attached. All right. It's a whole other section of shading here. This is actually called the anti-helix, the part I'm doing right now. And they say this is kind of like a Y shape. Okay, it kind of starts here and goes here, so almost like a Y, like it's shaped like that. That's the anti-helix. And the helix, they say, is kind of like a question mark, where the earlobe is the dot of the question mark, and then the outer part of that is the outer part of the ear. Okay, obviously that's generalized, but it gives you most. If you get those two things, that gives you most of the parts of the ear that you're going to wind up drawing. This is the other part I was talking about that's kind of important. Quite a bit of shadow actually gets there. It's not as dark as these, but that's going to kind of send it into the ear behind that leg of the helix. All right. So there's probably some stuff in there that I missed. And I can go back through and kind of hit that as I develop this to completion. But you'll notice there's something that I kind of left. Like, I didn't really touch this outer line at all. And that's because it's something I want you to really think about. Now, you can save this for the end, like I've done, if you choose to. Or you can do it at any point. But the important thing is to think about is, where is the light source coming from in your image? Now, the one I'm looking at, the light source is coming from this direction. Okay, so it's coming this way, which means these top parts of that helix are going to be pretty bright, and that the bottom parts here around the lobe and the outside, those are going to get some darker values. So think of this whole empty area as something that's kind of cylindrical, okay? And light will hit some of it, and then shadow will happen on the other side of it. So one of the first things that's going to make this look really 3D and really pop out, and you can do as much of this as you'd like. I do want you to do some of it though, okay? Shade the outside a little bit. Just like the philtrum or the Cupid's bow on the lips. If you put that in there, it's not part of the mouth, but it's right above the mouth. It actually makes it look like it's coming right off the paper. The same thing's true for the nose too. If you do the Cupid's bow underneath the nose, that helps your nose drawings to look a lot more realistic too. All right, so I'm going to keep a lot of that bright. There's some subtle value that happens here. And it's going to be this area here when I get to that you're really going to see that change in value and change in direction. All right. So this is where most of that shading happens. And then it kind of fades on. You see I'm doing these little circles. It kind of fades on to that brighter part of the helix. Kind of lied about the length of this video. It's turning into another fairly long one, but we'll keep it under 25 minutes just like the eye one. And that same pattern is going to happen, at least in my drawing, the entire way down, where the outside, it's a lot darker. And then it kind of transitions softly and slowly onto the rest of the ear. I'm getting a ton of dark value on the outside of this. This is actually part of the face where the ear either attaches, or for some people who have a kind of free standing lobe where it doesn't attach, but that's going to probably give you even more intense shadow. See all these little things, all these little variations. It's going to be different in everyone. But if you see it, draw it, okay? Definitely, it's a nice rule of thumb to follow. Don't draw anything you don't see. I know it sounds stupid, but we tend to generalize some things. And if you see it, even if it's like, yeah, it's subtle or it looks weird, put it in there. It's going to make it more real. All right. That's probably an okay place to stop. I'm reasonably satisfied with it, but I could just keep going on this. That's the nice thing about the ears. For those people who have been doing a really nice job with these lessons, there's so much to that ear that's going to be really great practice for you guys, and it's going to be something that you can really dive into and put in as much time as you want and make these look really dynamic. Okay, so that's our ear demo for today. This should take you just through today, and I'd like to give you guys another kind of longer term project after we get through these facial features and maybe the hair. So expect that, and I appreciate all your guys' good work. You're killing it. There are some folks who really still need to hand some stuff in, so make sure you're keeping pace with us. It's how we take attendance. Obviously, you can see in the grade book that things are being updated all the time. So I try not to motivate you guys through grades, but that obviously will be a factor as you either do these or as you aren't doing these. But please take your time in these. The folks that have spent some time in this, they're really getting good at it. And this is one of the hardest things for an artist to master, is the parts of the human face. And you guys are killing it. Okay? So until next time, thank you guys. We'll see you again.